Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Rochester. For more than 150 years, ours has been a congregation of open minds and loving hearts, celebrating many sources of wisdom, many spiritual paths, and many identities. Your faith, your doubts, your questions, your hopes for our world are welcome here. Our doors are closed because our hearts are open, practicing our values of care and compassion for one another and for our community. You can still connect online through both Sunday services, which you're at it, so well done, as well as coffee hour each Sunday at 11:15. Soon we'll be gathering new groups online for the fall, so be sure to check your e-news or contact the church if you have questions. There'll be book groups, chalice circles, forums, and other opportunities coming this fall, so keep an eye on your e-news to stay connected. Each week, our offering goes to support people within and beyond our church. This week is an annual important collection for P-Fund, which is an organization in the upper Midwest, and in particular in Minnesota, that invests in communities for lasting change, for justice and inclusion for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. It invests and partners with many different organizations in the area, and our church has supported them for many years. You can give at uurochmn.org/give. Thank you for your generosity in helping to create a more just and equitable and inclusive world. And I'm glad to welcome my friend and colleague today to preach, the Reverend Jim Foti. Jim is one of the ministers at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis. He has been here before in person, and we're so grateful for him offering a reflection and words this morning for our congregation. Welcome, Jim. We're glad you're here. And finally, in the words of the Reverend Eliza Tupper Wilkes, minister of this church in the 1870s, may our faith in humanity and our message of hope and good cheer light our way. It's good to be together.
This is the Unitarian Universalist Church. This is the Church of the Flaming Chalice. This is the Church of the Open Mind. This is the Church of the Loving Heart, where friends come together and share.
Good morning. Who doesn't love a river? 2 weekends ago, Karen and I were up on the North Shore and got to experience many of the beautiful rivers that empty into Lake Superior. There's the Gooseberry River, the Baptism River, the Temperance River, the Cascade, and many others. I'm particularly fond of the Split Rock River because, well, it's the only river where I ever caught a fish. Everyone tells me there's great fishing up there, and, well, I'm like, yada, 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 whatever. My new favorite river on the North Shore is the Brule River, which runs through Judge C.R. Magny State Park. It's the one with the famous Devil's Kettle Falls. The river splits in two at one point, The falls on the left drop down onto the rocks below, generating the loud noise and refreshing, cooling mists most folks love about waterfalls. The right half is a mystery. The water on this side of the river falls into a granite bowl about 10 feet below and then disappears. No one knows where it goes. That is so cool. What do you think about when you close your eyes and imagine a river? What words come to mind? For me, it's words like power, life, and redemption. I think of taking off my shoes and wading into the refreshing coolness. I think of the meditative sound the water makes as it rushes over rocks. I love to sit by a river and watch the water flow on by. Peter Mayer has a song he calls God is a River. He uses a river as a metaphor for life. At times we are experiencing wild, raging rapids, and other times we experience slow, meandering flows. The rapids and flows mean different things to each individual, but we can't avoid them, and we have to go through them. The reading I will share with you later is about a river, what a river would tell us about itself and its perception of our history, and how we use this particular river to separate and divide. In the end, the river will remind us that it, the river, is not about separating us and dividing us, but bringing us together and making us whole.
Another good Sunday morning to everybody. Today's story goes along with our summer theme of compassion, and it brings to mind what happens when we stop looking at what we do as individuals and really look at what we can do as a community when we cross borders and work together. The Little Gardener by Emily Hughes. This was the garden. It didn't really look like much, but it meant everything to its gardener. It was his home. It was his supper. It was his joy. Only there was one little problem. He wasn't much good at gardening. And well, it wasn't that he didn't work hard. I mean, he worked hard, very, very hard. He was just too little. But there was one thing that did blossom in his garden. It was a flower. It was alive and wonderful. It gave the gardener hope, and it made him work even harder. He worked all morning. He worked all afternoon. He worked all night. Still, he couldn't keep up with the garden, and it was dying. If it continued like this, he would have no home. He would have no supper. He would have no joy. One night, when the little gardener was feeling tired and sad, he made a wish. I wish I had a little bit of help. No one heard his little voice, but someone saw his flower. It was alive and wonderful. It gave that someone hope. It made that someone want to work harder. The next day, the gardener was weary and slept the whole day. In fact, he slept the whole week. He actually slept the whole month. And when he finally awoke, it had been just long enough for something to change. This is the garden now, and this is the gardener, planting more seeds of hope. You know, he doesn't look like much, but he means everything to his garden. Sometimes life can be so overwhelming when we're looking at it just trying to deal with it by ourselves as one person, when we really know that it's when we start working together that the real changes can be made and we can find all of the beauty in the world.
I am open, and I am willing for to be hopeless. What feels so strange, it dishonors those who go before us. So lift me up to the light of change. There is a hurting in my family, and there is sorrow in my town. There is a panic all across the nation, and there is wailing the whole world round. But I am open, and I am willing for to be hopeless. What feels so strange, it dishonors those who go before us. So lift me up to the light of change. Give me a mighty hope to hold my confusion, and give me a desert to hold my fear. Give me a sunset to hold my wonder, and give me an ocean to hold my tears. But I am open, and I am willing for to be hopeless. What feels so strange, it dishonors those who go before us. So lift me up to the light of change.
Good morning. It is good to be with you. We are separated by space and time, but we are still together, and we gather in a virtual way as we continue to create a place of communal caring and connection. Be enriched by the virtual presence of each other and draw yourself closer into the heart of love at this time of service and reflection. In this time together, we ask that our minds be open, our hearts welcoming, our arms embracing. We honor all who support us in this caring, loving, and all-inclusive ministry. We send gratitude to Jesse Finch, serving as our caring coordinator for the last 2 weeks, arranging care for our members and friends in need. Linda Thompson will take over tomorrow for the next week, and we thank her for that. The members of our caring committee are wonderful examples of our compassionate community, holding us up as we go through these challenging times. And as we continue through this time of staying at home, many of us may need additional care, whether it be pastoral care, grocery delivery, or an errand run, and we encourage you to reach out to Reverend Luke or myself with those requests. We thank all of you who have served our congregation in this way during this time. In this community, we make time each week to share pieces of our lives with one another. We do this because each person here has value. Each person's experience matters. We lift up those whose lives are touched by sadness, by illness, by worry, or by loneliness. We revel in those who are celebrating joys in their lives. May their happiness lift us all. May all of us find comfort, hope, joy, and healing strength in this community. Our hearts are with Jamie Crawford at this time. Jamie's mother, Loris Ticklar, 85 of Rochester, passed away peacefully on August 8th at the Waters Assisted Living Community. Loris had lived with Parkinson's disease, and although she will be missed terribly, it is a blessing that she's finally free. A celebration of life for Lori will be held today, Sunday, August 16th, at 2 p.m. in the River Park Chapel at Mackin Funeral Home. We hold Jamie, Randy, and the entire family in our hearts. We share the sad news of the passing of Marv Mitchell's brother, Richard Warren Mitchell, age 74, of Invergrove Heights, Minnesota. Richard passed away last week from COVID-19. We hold Marv and the entire Mitchell family in our hearts during this time of sadness. Please keep them in your thoughts. And we hold the entire Smith family, Steve, Lynn, Meredith, Sarah, and Chip, tight in our hearts. Since January, Steve has experienced numerous health issues and complications and has been diagnosed with a rare neurodegenerative disease called multiple system atrophy. It affects parts of the brain controlling the autonomic system. Steve will be attending Mayo's MSA clinic here in Rochester, which will focus on treating the symptoms and improving his quality of life. They would appreciate cards of support during this challenging time. Please keep them tight in your thoughts and send healing strength. And some celebrating is in order, as Mary Jane McCarty would like to share that she has completed 6 months of chemotherapy. We send her healing thoughts and well wishes for a continued good health journey. As we have over these last few months, we need to continue to reach out to all in our community to let them know we are still here and still holding them and supporting them. We encourage you all to send cards and make calls to those you love and support local businesses, opening the doors of communication and community. May the faith in the spirit of life, love for the community of earth, and love for the light in each other be ours now and in all the days to come.
I invite you to breathe deep the breath of life and bring to mind and heart all those names you are holding in your own heart this day, in joy or in sorrow. Those you know in your own life and household, and those you may not know around this world. May this song of prayer hold all of their names and yours. Hush, hush, somebody's calling my name. Hush, hush, somebody's calling my name. Hush, hush, somebody's calling my name. Oh my Lord, oh my Lord, what shall I do? It sounds Sounds like freedom. Somebody's calling my name. It sounds like freedom. Somebody's calling my name. Sounds like freedom. Somebody's calling my name. Oh my Lord, what shall I do? Sounds like justice. Somebody's calling my name. Sounds like justice. Somebody's calling my name. Sounds like justice. Somebody's calling my name. Oh my Lord, what shall I do? Hush, hush, somebody's calling my name. Hush, hush, somebody's calling my name. Hush, hush, somebody's calling my name. Oh my Lord, what shall I do?
The reading today is The Complaint of El Rio Grande by Richard Blanco. I was meant for all things to meet, to make the clouds pause in the mirror of my waters, to be home to the fallen rain that finds its way to me, to turn eons of loveless rock into lovesick pebbles and carry them as humble gifts back to the sea, which brings life back to me. I felt the sun and praised each star. I flocked about the moon long before you ever did. I've breathed air you'll never breathe. I've listened to songbirds before you could speak their names, before you dug your oars in me, before you created the gods that created you. Then countries, your invention, maps jigsawing the world into colored shapes, caged in bold lines to say, you're here, not there. You're this, not that. To say, yellow isn't red, red isn't black, black is not white. To say mine, not ours. To say war and believe life's worth is relative. You named me Big River, drew me blue, thick to divide, spick and Yankee, to say wetback and gringo. You split me in two, half of me us, the rest them. But I wasn't meant to drown children, hear mothers' cries, never meant to be your geography, a line, a border, a murderer. I was meant for all things to meet. The mirrored clouds and sun's tingle, bird songs and the quiet moon, the wind and its dust, the rush of mountain rain, and us. Blood that runs in you is water flowing in me. Both life, the truth we know, be one in one another.
Good morning, UUs of Rochester. I want to start off with some notes of gratitude. Gratitude to all of you for watching, and gratitude to Reverend Luke for inviting me to speak. I'm sorry that we can't be together in person, especially since I had such a great experience in Rochester a couple of years ago. But I'm grateful for the technology that allows us to still have some connection. And making connections despite obstacles is a theme I'd like to explore with you today. First, I want to go back, way back to elementary school, and tell you about my favorite show and tell item. It was something that no other second grader ever brought to school. I was the only kid I knew who had a globe of the moon. It was, like the actual moon, rather monochromatic, but it was full of craters and mountain ranges, and the sites of the first lunar landings were marked with bold black letters. As it turns out, I still have my moon globe. In fact, it's right here. The far side of the moon, which no human being had ever laid eyes on until the year I was born, is covered with craters from billions of years of meteorites. The side of the moon that constantly and reliably faces the Earth is much smoother, with expansive plains formed by ancient lava. Astronomers using the first telescopes in the 1600s thought that these plains were vast bodies of water, and they were given evocative names: the Sea of Nectar, the Ocean of Storms, the Bay of Rainbows, the Lake of Dreams. Human beings eventually figured out that there was no water on the moon, but the names have endured. Except for a few new craters and a couple of landforms named for recent astronauts, this globe of the moon is as accurate as it was 40-some years ago. In fact, this exact same globe, made by the exact same company, is still being sold. My childhood bedroom also had a globe of the Earth, and I loved that one too. It wasn't the kind where every country was a different color. There was no hot pink Paraguay or yellow Brazil. Rather, the land was presented in natural hues: the sand of the Sahara, the bright white of Antarctica, the verdancy of the Amazon and of the American Midwest. Its oceans were pale blue, and the currents were marked with arrows, so you could see the cold water flowing off California and the warm Gulf Stream racing toward Europe. The mountain ranges were raised, and you could run your finger along the Andes or to the top of Mount Everest. Countries and major cities were labeled, so the globe was useful when the nightly news talked about Libya or Peru. National borders were laid on top of the natural formations. That Earth globe didn't age nearly as well as my globe of the moon. That version of the world had 2 Germanys and 2 Vietnams, and now obsolete names like Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia. Even some of the geology has changed, with more water in some places and less in others, like the now nearly evaporated Aral Sea. We live in a world very different from the one of 4 decades ago. From national borders to natural features, the whirling sphere we occupy is constantly changed by its inhabitants. What hasn't changed is that it's mostly a small group of people with power who decide the lines on the maps, who decide who gets to be where, who decide which rivers bring people together and which rivers divide. Jigsawing the world, as the poet Richard Blanco says, to say you're here, not there, you're this, not that. Some religions contend that the division of people into nations and categories was ordained long ago by a far-off God. But there is no record of God handing down a stone globe from on high. The borders, boxes, and lines that separate people are human creations, and they are ours to move or redraw, ignore or erase. And what a time we are living in. What a time to be talking about who belongs where and who gets to decide. The southern border of our country is the scene of an ongoing human-caused crisis, with cruel camps and the recent destruction of a humanitarian aid station. And even as the United States government tries to keep out desperate migrants, most of the rest of the world has closed its borders to the people of the United States. As commentators have pointed out on Twitter, 51 years ago this summer, Americans traveled to the moon and walked on the Sea of Tranquility. In 2020, Americans can't even go to Canada. The world has been jigsawed like never before. It's a human right to be able to determine where you belong, to be free to travel either within or beyond the country you were born in. It's a human right to move beyond the labels and neighborhood boundaries and genders and economic classes assigned to us at any point in our lives. This long and turbulent summer that our country is experiencing is a reaction to a lack of freedom, a lack of liberation. We've been seeing countless acts of resistance to the idea that humanity should be divided into racial or other hierarchies. And profound questions are being asked as our country struggles to reckon and to reconcile. I want to talk a little bit about how I've learned about borders and belonging, in the hope that my small stories may be useful for your own understanding, or maybe they'll bring to mind experiences that you've had. My first story is about a guy I did volunteer work with back when I was a young adult living in Milwaukee. His name was David, and the places where society allowed him to fully belong were much more limited than mine. He was African American, developmentally disabled, HIV positive, and very low income. Despite the challenges he lived with, he was an upbeat and energetic person. My role as a volunteer with the local AIDS organization was to be his buddy and hang out with him once a week, and our times together were fulfilling and enjoyable. Early on, I decided that David and I belonged wherever we felt like going, even if that meant being followed around in stores or receiving a triple whammy of stares at restaurants because of his race, his disability, and our interracial friendship in a segregated city. A sense of entitlement is not always a bad thing. He was entitled to go anywhere I was, and I leveraged my privilege. David often enjoyed going for a ride in my car and getting outside of the under-resourced neighborhood where he lived. One day we were driving along an upscale street north of the Milwaukee lakefront, and David surprised me by saying this: "Black folks can't live around here. They'll burn your house down, throw a brick through your window." This was not the sort of commentary he usually offered, but it was coming from a very real place. As I listened, I felt myself wanting to disagree and defend. I had some very nice coworkers who lived in that neighborhood, and legally, in theory, black people could live there. But I also knew that a black woman in a nearby city had in fact recently had a brick come through her window. And I knew that the suburb we were driving through had a pattern of pulling over black motorists. David had been raised in the South, but the North was not nearly different enough for him to feel that he belonged in an all-white neighborhood. A small group of powerful people had decided who could live where. And this was one of my first lessons that people with lived experience are the real experts on where the real borders are. Another story from my young adulthood. My first job out of college was working on a newspaper copy desk. I remember editing a story for the International page, a story about an apartment building in a city with long-standing ethnic and religious divisions. The reporter who visited these apartments found a mosaic of people of different backgrounds living side by side in relative harmony. Their kids were growing up together and even falling in love across those ethnic and religious lines. It was an encouraging portrait of a more tolerant, pluralistic, forward-looking world. A year or so later, I thought of that article when war broke out in Yugoslavia, one of those countries from my old globe of the world. That's where that diverse apartment building was, in Sarajevo. I found myself wondering what happened to those people as the region erupted into war, genocide, and ethnic purging. The same ordinary people can live in harmony, or they can literally go for each other's throats. Yugoslavia's descent into chaos was a clear lesson to me that what happens at the top matters, that leaders matter, that messages matter. The rhetoric of hatred can be very dangerous and even deadly. Leadership can lift up, or it can turn neighbor against neighbor and destroy. As I said earlier, belonging is actually a human right. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights has sections specifically addressing these kinds of issues. Signed by dozens of countries in 1948, the Declaration includes statements that all people have the right to freely associate, and to not be part of associations if they prefer. And the Declaration addresses the limitations of national borders. Everyone has the right to leave any country, it says. Everyone has a right to a nationality and to change their nationality. Right now, with some 70 million people currently displaced around the world, we are reminded daily that the Declaration remains aspirational. Like any founding document or constitution, it's only as powerful as the people who believe in it. Basic human rights have unfortunately been turned into a potent political weapon in our country. From the atrocities at our border with Mexico to state-led violence in the heart of our cities, human rights are being ignored or abused to score points and fan the flames of division. This is antithetical to Unitarian Universalist values. It's antithetical to the foundation of most religions. We are all witnesses as the idea of belonging is being perverted, weaponized, and monetized. This is, of course, not a new strategy. From the earliest days of the colonies on this continent, people with money and power worked to divide poor blacks from poor whites. This was to keep the poor whites focused on hating other poor people, instead of overthrowing the rich. This strategy of creating an artificial hierarchy among the masses was so successful that it is still in use this very day. Right now, many of America's wealthiest people cast citizens and immigrants of color as a threat to white working class America, and millions of people believe this narrative. In-groups and out-groups are fostered not only to promote economic and political agendas, they also create the idea of a common enemy and a fear-based sense of belonging. This is one of the oldest tricks in the authoritarian playbook, a playbook that has been finding disturbing success across our fragile democracy. We indeed live in perilous and divided times. There are a number of ways to cross these borders and categories that divide us. Some of you may have heard of Bryan Stevenson, the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative. Stevenson is the writer behind Just Mercy, which is both a book and a movie about the huge disparities in how African Americans are treated by our judicial and prison systems. One of Stevenson's core pieces of advice to those with greater privilege is to get proximate, to get closer and find ways to interact with people and communities that are different from our own. Stevenson says this: "We've got to find ways to get closer to the poor, the neglected, the abused, the excluded, the marginalized, because it's in proximity to these communities that we hear things that we will not otherwise hear. We will see things that we will not otherwise see." I, of course, hadn't heard of Bryan Stevenson's work when I was a young adult volunteering in Milwaukee, but getting proximate had a profound effect on my worldview. That was because of the open heart I brought to the work. Experiences such as mine or something like the Peace Corps can be transformative for helping see the artificial lines that divide the oneness of humanity. But having the open heart is key, essential really, because there are plenty of examples of proximity not working at all when it comes to oppression and who belongs. If proximity and familiarity were all it took to fully recognize another person's rights and full humanity, every woman in Saudi Arabia would be treated as equal and free. Every woman in the United States would be treated as equal and free. Similarly, there are white people all over this country who employ people of color and undocumented immigrants in their homes, and then support policies that are harmful and even life-threatening to those same people. There's still something of a simplistic and romantic notion alive in the world that if we all just got to know each other, hearts and minds would change. Some hearts and minds would change, but we should know by now that we can't count on that alone to move the world forward. As the famous quote by Frederick Douglass says, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will." Love is a key ingredient in progressive movements, but it is rarely enough on its own. You've probably also heard the famous quote that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. That quote was originated by Unitarian minister Theodore Parker, who was a contemporary of Frederick Douglass in the 1850s. And the quote was popularized in the 1960s by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The phrase, "it bends toward justice," can make progress sound like some kind of inevitability, something that just happens on its own. But as numerous thinkers have pointed out, the moral arc bends toward justice because human beings grab a hold of it and bend it. And that's why, even with the daunting turmoil and deep divisions of these times, I'm hopeful. Perhaps more hopeful than I've ever been about progress against racism, white supremacy, and xenophobia. And I say this as a resident of a city that was rocked to its core only a few months ago after the horrific murder of George Floyd. That's because the 9-minute video filmed here in Minneapolis sparked a global revolution, with Confederate statues toppling, professional athletes taking a knee by the dozen, and racist policies and practices being re-examined around the world. This reckoning and reconciling are long overdue, and white people have participated in the demonstrations and calls for change in unprecedented numbers, joining African Americans who have been seeking change and doing the work since Frederick Douglass and even before that. People are crossing borders and bending the arc. As incredible as this turning point has been, it is only that, one point, on a generations-long journey toward healing and justice and wholeness. The arc will continue to need to have hands on it to continue to bend. There's more work to be done. So what can we do? Many of you are probably already taking steps, but here are a few ideas. One is to get involved in anything that allows or encourages people to exercise their right to vote. Voting is a way of expressing values, of supporting the inherent worth of all people, of choosing leaders who reject racism and other forms of division. And because so much is done online these days, there are ways to get out the vote from your home. The National Unitarian Universalist campaign called UU the Vote is a great place to start. Another thing you can do right now is contact elected officials to encourage them to protect the Postal Service, whose role in helping people vote is of increased importance right now. We are in a very critical moment for our country, and if there are electoral outcomes you are hoping to see, I encourage you to act on that hope. Another thing you can do to fight racism and division is to question the history and perspectives you may have been taught, and to seek out more inclusive narratives. I recommend books like Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi, and the Netflix documentary 13th, which is free for anyone to watch. Knowing these narratives, told by marginalized people themselves, can be helpful for understanding our country as it really is, and for explaining it to others. There are some people whose minds will never change, of course, but there is value in interrupting false narratives and modeling the fact that you listen to and believe voices of color. The newest generations are already better at this than the older generations, and you can encourage this trend toward greater truth. And, as we've been reminded over the past few months, taking to the streets has a dramatic power to bend the arc. The sweeping changes we are seeing are because of the number of protests and protesters who have been active nationwide. The overwhelming majority of demonstrators have been peaceful, a national and international mosaic of righteously angry humanity, calling for the end of systems that reinforce racism, white supremacy, and the myth of human separateness. So many of us have come together to create an earthly bay of rainbows, our own lake of dreams, and push forward the changes that humanity desperately needs. May Americans of all backgrounds across the country continue to seize this moment of great challenge and great hope, to dismantle the borders, structures, and systems that keep us from embodying our highest ideals. May it be so, because we make it so. Thanks for watching, and blessings to you all.
Gonna keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Never turning back. Never turning back. Gonna keep on loving boldly. loving boldly. Keep on loving boldly. Never turning back. Never turning back. Gonna reach across our border. Reach across our borders. Reach across our borders. Never turning back. Never turning back. Gonna teach our children courage. Teach our children courage. Teach our children courage. Never turning back. Never turning back. Gonna keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Gonna keep on moving forward. Never turning back. Never turning back.